Je vais faire une introduction en français, si vous m'autorisez, Peter. On est extrêmement content, comme vous le savez, je vais vous expliquer ça demain, d'avoir obtenu un grand programme projet en psychiatrie de précision, le PEPR ProPsy. Et une des actions qui est prévue dans ce PEPR, c'est de construire les liens entre vous, les centres experts, et puis les autres cohortes dans le monde. Et on a commencé à travailler ce matin avec le professeur Peter Falkai. On a eu une matinée très stimulante qu'on va vous résumer pour décrire la manière dont fonctionnent non pas tout à fait les centres experts, mais les centres d'excellence allemands qui sont coordonnés par Peter Falkai, et on lui a demandé de venir vous décrire le fonctionnement de ces centres d'excellence. Et on a commencé à réfléchir ensemble, on aura l'occasion de vous en reparler, sur comment est-ce qu'on va travailler ensemble pour échanger des données, échanger des docteurs, échanger des chercheurs. Il y a plein d'actions qui vont être mises en place, monter des actions de communication ensemble, bref, beaucoup de choses qui ont été commencées à être discutées ce matin. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Peter Falkai, who is Professor of Psychiatry and Chair of the Department of Psychiatry and Psychotherapy in München, and in Germany, and also the coordinator of the network of 6 Centers of Excellence in Germany. And we are very lucky because he's going to describe how this works. Thank you very much, Peter.
Marion. Thank you very much. First of all, congratulations to you, your team, and all of you for getting that, because I think that ProPsy is a sign that you can do successfully research on mental illness. And then I'm thinking, you know, I'm now in this business for 30 years, and I remember that I had always the feeling, okay, the guys in oncology, cardiology, neurology and all these ologies, but not psychiatry, you know, were recognized, but also I had the feeling that we can do research, but that was not recognized well. And I think this is now starting to change, and I think this is a big chance. So to introduce you into the topic for the next half an hour, I'd like to, oops, doesn't move. Oh, it moves that way. That's fine. So we are a large network. Just to tell you, it's 170 PIs, and I will tell you it's 6 centers. And also it's very kind of you that I have been helpful in sort of coordinating the center, but currently Andreas Meyer-Lindenberg and Andreas Heinz, this is from Mannheim and he's from Berlin. They're currently heading the center. So I'm heading the Munich part of it. And then in 2 years' time, Sylvia Schneider and myself will take over, just to give the full picture. So here we are, this is the way. Here you see some people. And maybe that is Silke Lipinski she is actually having autism spectrum disorder herself. So from the beginning, we have included patients and relatives in building up the center. And in the beginning, I had to be very honest, I had the feeling this is going to be difficult. The truth is, it is difficult but good. And I've learned considerably, and I can only support you to do that at an early stage, because that means that they adjust the way we think and you adjust the way they think, and it's good. It makes a difference. So just to give you an introduction, the German government 10 years ago thought that the translation from research into clinical, let's say, everyday practice is not good, and founded the so-called German health centers. And as you can see, these are the 6 ones: diabetes, cardiovascular, infectious diseases, pulmonary, neurodegenerative, oncology. And when I saw the list at that stage, I was president of my society. And so I wrote to the minister and said, that's fine, a beautiful list, but one is lacking: mental health. And so in every talk I've given as a president, I said, you know, we are doing wonderfully, but we need a health center for mental health. Well, now we have it. So what was it? You had, as a regional center, you could apply to become a member of the whole German Center of Mental Health. So we as Munich Augsburg applied for that. Why Augsburg? Because in Munich, we have two universities, Technical University and Ludwig Maximilians University, where I come from. And in addition, we have added to that the University of Augsburg. Why? Because my former deputy, he is now chair there. That's one thing. The second thing is we thought beside the traditional big universities, we wanted to include a newly founded one. But in addition, we included Max Planck Institute for Psychiatry and Helmholtz. So it was for me, because I coordinated this, important to have everyone who does top science on mental illness on board. And so we need university and extra university institutions. So that is as it was after a competition, a hard competition of 2 years. So 20 centers competed, and then 6 were evaluated. Out of them, Bochum, clinical psychology, and then in the east, it's Halle, Jena, Magdeburg, and Mannheim, and Tübingen, Munich, and Berlin, altogether 6 centers. And so we have depicted how many patients, inpatients, outpatients, and so forth, that region would actually cover. You can immediately see that there is, for instance, the north and the mid of Germany not very well represented. Colleagues from there will say that each time, which is okay, but we work on that to change that. So we are well connected. So what are the central missions? So what are the things we'd like to have? You can say that in a word. We'd like to measure the burden of mental illness, and we like to reduce it, full stop. But if we do this in more detail and we say we will sustainably improve mental health in Germany through research and optimize forward and reverse translation, taking into account all age groups and embracing diversity. We will investigate the interplay between somatic and mental health, very important, for the benefit of both those affected and the population as a whole. I mean, it's clear this center is called a German Center of Mental Health, not mental illness and not psychiatry. So we look at the healthy population and ask ourselves, what are the risk factors under which you actually can or will develop mental illness? We will bring together existing excellence in research and establish this sustainable, cooperative, and harmonized infrastructure. That's very important because, I mean, we are spread. You know, everyone does everything on a small scale. What we want to do top things as a net and avoid doing separate things like, clinical ratings and so forth. We will combine our areas of expertise in a coordinated strategy. We will establish a national standard for the involvement of patients and relatives. This is what was outlined, and I think that worked very well, including children and adolescents, which is difficult, but again, it worked well. So we even have a little kid being sick, but being part of the network and giving us advice, what they think. Even these little 10 years old give you advice what they think should be done in their surrounding. We will position the DZPG as the center point of reference for evidence-based mental health information, in addition to research. So just participation and co-creation as one core component. Well, there is a stage model, as I learned from patients and relatives. So in the beginning, we instrumentalize them. And then we walk up and then involve them. And the idea is actually they have their self-organization and even have their own research. At the moment, we are not yet there. There is one person, Silke Lipinski, which I showed. She is actually having autism spectrum disorder, but she's working as a researcher at the Berlin University doing exactly this kind of research, which is quite interesting. So she can look at both sides. So what is needed and what she really does and what that means to the illness. This is the organization. So structure of participation during creation phase, trialogue board, working groups, which is very important. And the steering committee, we sort of meet on a 4-weekly basis, and on a 2-weekly basis have our Zooms. So if we actually look, I mean, might be a bit confusing to start with, but it was important for us to have a clear infrastructure, governance structure, which includes the trialogue board, so patients and relatives, a local innovation board, so to make sure that industry kicks in, and startups and so forth. Then we have thematic focus groups, just to make sure that we don't lose good ideas, and make sure that the young people, so you, are part of this. So we have an extra sort of young DZP organization that organize themselves, and they sort of make sure that teaching is done well and things like that. And this is site management and the sort of the steering board. Now, the question is, how is the procedure? How are these things done? So we start with the management board, then we have the executive board. They represent the partners, the patients, the relatives, the young people, and we have a managing director, just to make sure that everything is, looked after. Because, I mean, physicians like me are sometimes a bit disturbed. And so it's good to have someone who says, now you need to do this and this. So what about the budget? So this is about how we work. And this is about the budget. Well, to give you an estimate, and it's a lot of money, and I'm very humble and proud that we get this money. The center receives, the whole center, 30 million euro per year. And this is not for 5 years, for 10 years, but for indefinite. So each of the 6 centers receives 5 million per year. But there is a review after 5 years and the strict review after 10 years. And after 10 years, usually 2, maybe even 3 centers are excluded and new centers are brought in. So the idea is to have a national resource, but in addition to that, make sure that the best and the most ambitious centers are actually included there. So I will tell you something about the research domains. So this is research projects. That's about a third of the funding. We have 20% of the funding goes for infrastructures, which is platforms, just to make sure that you actually do the same quality of genotyping and things like that. Then we have 10% for clinical studies, because they said, we should do translation. So we want to do translation. How can you do translation? You have to do good, top clinical studies. Patient participation, cooperation with other centers, and then overarching activities that includes management, training, and so forth. Now, what is this flexible funds? Flexible funds, as I call, is the risk. So we keep money in order to, for instance, tell young people like you get 50,000 euro for 2 years, and you show with your project, is your idea, what you make out of it. And after 2 years or after a year, we decide whether we continue to fund you. So the idea is, foster even sometimes, if I may say so, crazy ideas, and maybe sort of invest into risk, or maybe have the possibility to have a cooperation with Propsy and say, a good idea would be, together we fund this and this. So that is why a fourth of the money is left for that. So, but this is different. So different means that different sites give different money. So for instance, if we look at the different research domains, which I will allude to in a minute, then for instance, Munich give to basic science 70%, but there are other ones who give 50% more for, let's say, innovative, individualized interventions. So the idea is that everyone keeps his profile, but, comes together and gives then a good sort of overview. So what is the DZPG infrastructures? As I told you, that was 20%. So the idea is to have platform, starting with data and knowledge management, including model system, clinical studies, psychotherapy, imaging, and neuromodulation, to have platforms where we actually define standards, which are then used in the whole of the center, in order to make sure that the data we acquire, the study protocols we have, are as equal as possible. Now, what is Young DZPG? This is an organization of people who are currently doing training in psychiatry or psychology. Every center, adds to this group 2 to 4 people, and they organize themselves. And the idea is to help us with building up a high quality of clinical scientist education, to make sure to have in the future people. So once I'm in a wheelchair and things like that, to make sure to have people who like clinical research in, let's say, clinical neurosciences. That might be neurology, that might be psychiatry, sort of doing both, looking after patients and doing high quality research. We want to be linking up quite closely. That's the German Center of Child and Youth Health. And you can see here are some sort of platforms we will join with them, make sure, because they will starting with us in parallel, make sure that actually we do research along the same lines. So that's a bit on the trialogue approach. I told you the idea is that actually they try to set their own topics, as you can see, recovery, individual intervention, and so forth, and give us some input from their side. Now, as you can see, so this is the idea how they work. And the example is autism research collaboration, and they have already done some research along these lines. That is the goal. The goal is actually to have an own center where they can actually do with us the research, but then actually they have some funding where they can do their own research based in each of the centers. Now, what did I tell you so far? At the beginning, how do we work? The second, how much money do we spend on what? And the third was different aspects, so infrastructure, so what is the platforms, and then I alluded some to the, let's say, trialogue work. Now the question is, what are the topics we work on? So we have defined 3 domains. I will keep the time. 3 domains. One is on resilience, risk and resilience in mental and physical health over the lifespan. So these are the centers responsible. So it's Bochum and Munich. So the idea is starting, in model systems, starting in humans, trying to understand, what causes mental illness. The second domain is innovative, individualized interventions, Tübingen and Jena. And the third is prevention, recovery, and participation in living environments. So the idea is understand mental illness, prevent and treat it, and then implement it in everyday clinical practice to make sure that the burden is reducing. So that's the idea of this life cycle. So what is beyond that? So if we actually look over the lifetime, then the idea is we'd like specifically look for trauma. We like to specifically look for the transmission of mental disorders across generations. And we'd like to look at risk factors or life biosocial trajectories of mental and physical health. Looking at, as I say, where risk is accumulated. So trauma, transgenerational transmission, and longitudinal course. So what is covered in domain 2? So the idea is we'd like to look at digital and especially neuromodulatory interventions. We look at personal pharmaco and psychotherapy. That means who needs what, when. And, which I like a lot, is targeted stepped care strategies. So it means not giving everything to everyone in the same moment, which doesn't work, but trying to go low threshold, for instance, in the healthy population, and give people the possibility to embark, seek help, and then go step by step. So the idea is that to have at a certain stage, maybe in 10 years, a network where we have outreach of each center where people can attend when they have principal prodromes of mental illness. Then we have a transition ward, which actually specifically looks for young people between the ages of 16 and 25. And then look for, let's say, once they are discharged, for a looking after them afterwards. So that is the idea, innovation in every sort of what we think needs to be done. And that's the third domain, prevention, recovery, and participation in the living environment. So we look at population-based interventions. So looking at those populations, migrants, maybe people with, for instance, disabilities and so forth, who have an increased risk of developmental illness. So what can I do then? What about recovery? We use that as a frequent term. So what is embedded then? And look at diversity, social inclusion, and mental health, fighting stigma and discrimination. We thought that's a topic we need to address if we have a center like that. The other thing is, you see, the mentality of the German government is, now, this is the center. If we have a problem in mental health, we ask them. They need to give us the answer. So actually, that's good if we are, equipped here in order to give answers, because usually I don't think they want to know anything about the neurobiology of depression, but they want to know things about why are people stigmatized, why is it so difficult to get a working place if you have mental illness, and so forth. So we have done three things, because we have defined 39 projects. And so exactly, the reviewers did the same, the eyebrows went up and said, oh my God, completely chaotic. Said, wait, we have defined three major projects to make sure that we are actually doing the right thing. So Flagship 1, we specifically deal with urban mental health. So we actually look at risk factors which in an urban environment increases your risk of developing illness, which is, for instance, drugs, which is pollution, which is migrational background, and so forth and so forth. And we'd like to plan interventions to show that we can actually not only measure, but reduce mental health burden. Flagship 2, early recognition, intervention, and prevention. So what we want, as I pointed out, to make sure that people are informed about the fact that there is mental illness as part of health and illness, and they can approach a network of early intervention centers, as I outlined. And we'd like, with machine learning and so forth, recognize vulnerable people early on, intervene and prevent that they develop the full illness. And enhanced psychotherapy means that actually we'd like to improve psychotherapy by combining it either with other non-pharmacological or pharmacological interventions. Make sure that we take the best out of all worlds, because at least in Germany, there is like psychotherapy, good. Pharmacotherapy, don't know. Combination, do we need it? So we need the proof, when to combine and when to use what. Oh, that was the last one, is the one mental health platform. So the idea is, so if we, let's say in rather 5 or 10 years, think about how can we sort of really do a change for humans, we look at different angles of mental health. That is human-animal interactions. We know that from COVID a bit. Biodiversity, so what we do to the world, climate change, and interventions. So that is the big picture. But first of all, we'd like to tackle the issues in the 3 flagships. So I'm almost ready. So that is a bit of the timeline and the very simple things. So what we'd like to do in the first 2 years, starting in May, ramping up infrastructures, initiation of research project and PPI strategy. So we will hopefully do this in May. We are already working quite hard to get this done. And then evaluation of the research projects, of which of them should be starting out of the flagship and then connected research projects. And then what about the flagship trials? Which one selected? Then we have a midterm review after 5 years. And then we would like to make sure that we have done our homework and then have a definite large scale trials, 1 or 2. Because I think the task here is not only do incremental things, but actually then choose questions which need to be answered in mental illness, and then do pivotal trials to actually give answers. Either it works or it doesn't work. And then, well, at the end, we hope that was a long sort of fight, because I think that mental illness burden is measurable. Some of my colleagues said it is not. I think it needs to be, otherwise we are not part of medicine. And we'd like to have reduced the translational cycle. So the cycle from having a, let's say, target and bring it into clinical practice, which is currently 15 years and more. And we'd like to reduce it to 7. Again, some of my colleagues say this is overambitious. I always say if you are not ambitious, it won't work. So we try. So this is the milestones I've just outlined, and that was it. Thank you very much for your attention.